Hello everyone from Thule. This is Patty Blount. I am author of A Match Made at Christmas, which was originally published under the title Goodness and Light. I am going to show you how to make my world famous Italian rainbow cookies, which some people refer to as Venetians. I'm sure you've seen them in the bakery. They're tiny little squares, and they have like red, green, and yellow layers. I've been making these cookies for years. They were my mother's recipe originally, and my mother was always really angry with me because she kept saying that my cookies tasted better than hers, and she couldn't understand why, because it was the same recipe. Well, I'm going to share that secret with you in just a little bit. First, let me tell you what you're going to need. First thing you're going to need are 3 of these 13 by 9 inch pans. And we're going to grease them and line each with wax paper. Another thing you'll need, if you're like me, you're going to need something to hold your hair back. You'll need 3 sticks of butter. I use regular salted butter. We're going to soften those, get them to room temperature. You're going to need some food coloring. It's up to you if you want to use drops or solid. You'll need red and green. You're going to need 4 eggs, which we're going to separate. And then you're going to need a cup of sugar and 2 cups of flour. And here's the secret ingredient. It turns out I've been making this cookie incorrectly. The recipe typically calls for almond paste. I've been using this can of solo almond filling, not realizing I'd made a mistake. But my finished cookie tends to come out more like a pastry instead of a crunchy cookie, and I feel that gives it a more, I think, softer texture, and they last a little bit longer. All I know is I get requests for these cookies every single year, and I've been making them wrong. So that's the answer, solo almond filling. Another thing you're going to need is apricot, or if you prefer, raspberry. We're going to use that to assemble the layers at the end. And finally, the last thing that you're going to need is some semi-sweet chocolate for the glaze on top. Okay, let's get started. So I have greased all 3 pans. I have lined them with wax paper, and then I grease the wax paper. Let me show you what this looks like. Okay, I have all 3 pans here. Here's 1. Can you see it? 2 and 3. And you notice the wax paper hangs a little bit above the side. We're going to need this later to get the layers out of the pan because the layers are very thin. Okay, now another thing that I like to do is I took 3 more slices of wax paper and I put them on my counter. Those are going to be where I depan the cooked layers when they're done. Okay, in this bowl I have my softened butter. I have a clean bowl over here with the handheld mixer where I'm going to dump the egg whites as soon as I start separating the eggs. So the egg whites will go in the white bowl, the egg yolks will go in this bowl along with the butter, and then I will add the can of almond filling. I'll be right back. Okay, so what's in the stand mixer right now is the sugar, the egg yolks, the butter, and the can of almond filling. Next up, I'm going to start beating the egg whites separately until they're a nice stiff meringue. Okay, as you can see, the egg whites are nice and stiff. You can see the peaks standing straight up, even on the mixer. Nice and stiff. You want that air in this cookie. Next up, I'm going to start adding the 2 cups of flour into the stand mixer where I have the egg yolks, the sugar, the butter, and the can of almond filling. I'm going to do this on a low speed, very slowly, to avoid getting a shower of flour. Okay, when that's nice and incorporated, the next step is to add the egg whites into this batter, but we're going to fold it in, not use the mixer blade. Okay, I've removed the bowl from the stand mixer, and now what I'm going to do is just take the egg whites beaten and just drop them in here. Well, I might need 2 hands for this. Let's see. There it goes. And now we're going to fold this to incorporate it just until it's mixed. We're not going to overbeat. Okay, we're done incorporating the beaten egg whites into the other mixture. You can see there's still a little dollop of meringue on the spatula. That's fine. So, it's cake batter, not cookie dough. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fill those 3 pans that we prepared in the first step. The first thing I'm going to do is leave 1 layer untinted, which is the base yellow. I don't measure this because it's such a skimpy recipe. You'll find that there's really not much to fill all 3 pans. We're going to take about 1.5 cups to 2 cups per pan. But I find if I use a measuring cup for this, I don't have enough because it's very difficult to get everything out of the cup and off the spoons into the pan. So I do eyeball it. All right, here we go. I have a back of a spoon that I'm using to force the batter into all the corners of the pan. I'm just spreading a very thin layer. It's just enough to coat the bottom. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch thick. But you'll notice it's not quite enough to fill this pan. I may need more. This is one of the reasons why I don't tint everything ahead of time. I may need to grab some more batter from the bowl. Let me do that. I'll grab a spoonful here. Try not to drip it everywhere. Okay, here we go. Perfect. I'll smooth this over. Now, one of the things that you'll also find is when you start tinting the other layers red and green, you may also not have enough. And it's perfectly fine to add red to the green layer or yellow or whatever and just mix it right in the pan until the tinted batter takes over so that you don't end up with a marble effect. All right, I'm going to keep filling this pan. Okay, what I've done now is I've taken the remaining batter and I've divided it in half into 2 different bowls. One will be red, one will be green. Now, if you've never worked with paste food coloring before, what you do is you take a toothpick and you pierce the lid and you kind of scoop up a little bit of the red dye. And you're going to drag that toothpick through the batter, excuse me. A little goes a very long way. I'm going to take the toothpick and toss it into my garbage bowl, as Rachel Ray would say. And let's just start tinting this. I'm still working one-handed as I hold the phone, so I may need much more than this, but that's the beauty of the paste. We can keep tinting until we're happy with the color. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be back here in a second. Okay, it's not exactly red, but this works for me. I don't like it bright red myself. I think it looks just inedible, but this is fine. Now, I've left that bowl untinted, just in case this is not enough to coat the bottom of my pan and I have to steal from it. Okay, I'm going to start filling the pan. Like before, I'm using the back of a spoon to force the batter into all of the corners of the pan, trying to coat the entire surface, the entire bottom. Like I said, these layers are very thin. This is why we have the wax paper in here, because otherwise we'd never be able to get them out of the pan without tearing and shredding them. Okay, as it turns out, I did not have enough red batter to fill this pan. So I borrowed some of the untinted layer that's left in the bowl, added it to the pan, and without scraping the bottom, I'm mixing it in. If I scrape the bottom, I may end up ruining the layer of Crisco that we put on the wax paper, which we don't want to do. So we don't have to be too fastidious with this. This will be buried under other layers later, but it's just enough to make the batter coat the bottom of the pan. Okay, the final bowl. This is the last layer. I'm going to drop in the liquid green. I'm not using paste on this one. And we'll start stirring that up. Okay, the green layer is done. As it turns out, the green layer I had much more batter for than I did for the other two. So I'm going to put that one on the bottom rack of my oven because it's going to bake a little bit more slowly. These two I'm going to have to watch carefully because they're much thinner, much skimpier layers. Okay, we're going to put them into the oven. The oven is set for 350 degrees. I'm going to watch them like a hawk. Do not walk away because you are putting wax paper in your oven, and yes, I have had a few instances where they've ignited. I have a fire extinguisher nearby in case that happens again. I'm going to throw them into the oven. They come out just when the edges of the pan start to brown, and this shine that you see on the layer is gone. You don't want to overbake them. Okay, I was watching very carefully. You notice the nice golden edge that the yellow layer has. I pulled it out of the oven, and now I'm immediately going to invert it onto the waxed paper that we put out before. The waxed paper makes it come out of the pan very easily. Now we have to carefully take the paper that was in the pan off the layer without tearing it. This can be hard. There's a bit of a tear here. I'm just going to pat that back into place. I'm not too concerned about it. Another one there. Whoops, now that's a problem. We don't want that to happen again. So we lost part of the edge, but overall, pretty good. Here looks good. The pink layer looks good. The wax paper came off very easily. Let me see if I can pat these back into place a little bit. Sometimes as they cool, they're not so noticeable. Nobody will see this once the cake is assembled. Okay, now let me go check the last layer, the one that I said was a little too thick. That looks perfect. I'm going to pull that out now. Okay, so the green layer may be a bit overdone. You can see the browning everywhere, but that's fine. What we're going to do next is allow all three layers to cool completely. And after they cool, we'll start assembling the layers with a bit of, I use apricot preserves between each layer. My mother always used raspberry. Some people use one of each. It's up to you what you prefer. When we assemble them, all of this will be hidden. Nobody will see the overbrowning, and nobody will ever see these cracks. The only reason the cracks can be annoying is it becomes very difficult to get to work with the layers after that. Now the reason I put them on wax paper is you can see just how thin even the thickest layer is. Really not that thick at all, less than 1/8 of an inch each layer. The wax paper is going to help me lift and flip them over to stack them on a jelly roll pan. And then when we're done, we'll slip them into the refrigerator to solidify, and then tomorrow, cover them in chocolate. Okay, so I finished spreading the first layer of preserves onto the bottom layer. Next up will be the yellow layer. The yellow always goes in the center. It's up to you if you want to use red or green as the bottom, it doesn't matter, but the yellow always goes in the middle. So I use the waxed paper to help me transport these layers because they're so super thin and they crack easily. So what I'm going to do is flip it upside down and try to align it with what I've got on the first layer without messing it up. In fact, let me flip it around because there's a little less here. Okay, now I'm just trying to align it slightly before I take the paper off because right now it's still pliable. There we go. And now I'll peel this last layer off. Looks pretty good. And then the cracks will be hidden with the next layer of preserves. Just like before, I'm going to spread the preserves on a very thin layer. It's just enough to coat these layers. It's not going to be very thick. And I actually remove a lot of the chunks of fruit because that will end up making it not adhere when the cookies are done. Okay, so I finished with the second layer, and as you can see, I used the back of my spoon, and I'm just spreading a really thin coating of the fruit on here, and I'm actually removing most of the chunks because that will end up making the cookies separate when they're finished. Now, what's left is the last layer. Remember, it's up to you which one you want to use as the top. I'm using my red layer. Use the waxed paper to lift and very carefully meet your ends and then drop it into place. If it's not quite level, you can use it to kind of scoot it around a little bit. And once it's in place, peel off that last layer very carefully so you don't rip the layer. Okay, so the cake is assembled. Now what we have to do is wrap it tightly in plastic wrap and weight it with a heavy object like a cutting board or a heavy textbook and refrigerate it overnight so that those layers adhere as compactly as possible. And then tomorrow we will frost it in chocolate.